Perfect. Bonsoir à tous. Et nous
Good
avons
evening,
donc le
everyone.
plaisir de continuer
We have
cette
the
série
pleasure
de
of
cours
continuing
sur la
this series
disparition
of
des Juifs du
classes
Moyen-Orient
on the
avec des
disappearance of
invités
the Jews
français ce
in
soir.
Middle East with the
Nous avons le
French
plaisir d'accueillir donc
guest
Emmanuel
tonight. So
Debono,
we
qui
have
est
the pleasure
historien.
of welcoming Emmanuel
Ses
Debono,
recherches
who's a
portent sur
historian.
les
His
racismes
research is on
les
racism
antiracismes ou
and
l'antiracisme,
anti-racism, or
plus focalisé sur le
more
pays
focused
France.
on France.
En cherchant sur Internet, j'ai pu trouver
Looking on
que
the internet,
vous
I was
avez
able to
rédigé
find
de
out
nombreux
that you
articles
had
dans un blog
written
du
many
Monde qui s'appelle
articles
Cœur
in a blog of Le
d'antiracisme
Monde, which
et
is
qui se présente comme un
anti-racism,
regard
and
sur le
which is like
militantisme pratique.
look on militant ideas,
Vous avez écrit plusieurs
practices. You
ouvrages,
wrote
notamment l'ouvrage
several
qui est issu de votre
books,
thèse aux origines de l'antiracisme,
specifically the
la
one
LICA
which is come from your
1927-1940,
thesis,
qui a été
origin
édité
of
aux éditions CNRS en
anti-racism, which was
2012,
edited in the
et le
CNRS
dernier ouvrage le plus
edition in
important, je pense,
2012,
et pour moi
and
le
your
plus célèbre en
latest
fait, qui m'a
work,
permis de
which
vous
is for
connaître
me the most famous that
beaucoup
enabled
plus,
me
c'est le
to know
racisme
you,
dans le
is
pouvoir,
racism
antisémitisme, racisme
in
et xénophobie dans la
anti
justice, aux
Semitism,
éditions Paris
xenophobia in front
Universitaire
of
de
justice
France
in the Édition
2019.
Paris
Et
Universitaire
vous
in
êtes
France
aussi
in
rédacteur en chef du
2019.
droit
You're
de
also
vivre de la revue
editor-in-chief of Droit
universaliste
de Vivre,
de la
the
LICRA. Je vous
universalist
laisse la
magazine
parole.
of LICRA, and
Quant
I'll
à
give
ces
you the floor.
organisations-là, vous
As
allez
to
nous
these
présenter
organizations, you're going to present
le travail de la LICA
the
dans
work
les
of
pays arabes
LICRA
ou du monde
in
arabo-musulman.
Arabic countries
Merci
or
beaucoup, je
in
vous donne la parole et à la suite
Arabo-Muslim
de cette
world. I'll
présentation,
give
vous
you the
pourrez
word,
poser
and
vos
after this
questions, mais en attendant,
presentation,
vous
you
pouvez
will be
écrire
able
dans
to
le
ask
chat.
questions. But for now,
N'hésitez
you
pas à
can
poser
write
des
them in
questions
the
ce soir.
chat. Do not
Merci.
hesitate so that you do not forget your
Merci
questions.
beaucoup
Thank you.
Erika.
Thank you very much,
Bonsoir
Erika. Good
à toutes et à
evening,
tous. Merci d'être
everyone.
présents sur
Thank you for
cette
being here for
nouvelle
this
séance.
new
Je remercie également
session.
l'Institut de la Thèse
I'd like to
Jonathan
thank the
Mehta
Jonathas
et Erika pour leur
Institute,
travail
Joel, who was not able to be
fabuleux.
here, and Erika for their
Jonathas
fantastic work
existe et puis merci
since
aussi à
Jonathas
l'ISGAP
has existed. And also
coproduit
thank you to ISGAP that
ce cycle de
co-produces
conférences
this
qui s'appelle Sur la
cycle of
disparition des Juifs
conferences
du
about the
Moyen-Orient. Je me suis engagé
disappearance of Jews in
parler
the Middle East.
trop vite, donc
I
veuillez
committed
m'inviter
to not speak too fast, so please don't
à me
hesitate
ralentir
to
parce qu'il y a une traduction
slow me down
simultanée
because there's
et donc
simultaneous
de faire attention.
translation, and I'll try to be
Alors je
careful.
suis, juste en un
So,
mot, vous
in
l'avez
one
dit,
word,
Erika, rédacteur en
you
chef du
said
droit de
it,
vivre. Le
Erika.
droit de
I'm the
vivre, le
editor-in-chief for Le
DDV,
Droit de Vivre, or
c'est la revue
DDV,
historique du
which
droit de
is the
vivre qui a été fondée
historical
en
magazine of the LICRA
1932.
that was
Je dirais
founded in
quelques mots pendant
1933,
cette
and I'll say
conférence.
a few words about it during
Et
this
donc j'ai fait une
session.
thèse en fait
And so
sur les
I wrote
origines
a
de
thesis on the
qui s'appelait
origins
la
of
LICA.
the LICRA, which was
La Ligue
LICA
internationale contre
initially,
l'antisémitisme, l'antisémitisme,
International League
jusqu'en
Against
1979.
Anti-Semitism,
Et,
and
et
until
donc,
1979, from its beginning and until
sur cette thèse
1979.
qui portait vraiment sur
And
les
on
années
this thesis that
1930, j'ai
was
été amené
really on the
finalement à beaucoup croiser
1930s,
les pays
I
du
was
Maghreb
able to
essentiellement, donc
see
il y a
most
peut-être un
of
petit
Maghreb
décalage par rapport
country.
aux
So there's a
thématiques
little
habituelles, mais bon, peu
discrepancy
importe. Une
versus the
semaine, Madame
usual
Aflalo avait parlé
thematic. I remember
de ce qui
that
se rapportait sur
Madame
le Maroc.
Aflalo had talked about
Et donc,
Morocco. And
je vais essentiellement
so
parler du Maghreb, mais je
I will
parlerai
talk
évidemment
mostly
aussi
about
de la
Maghreb,
Palestine
but also about
pour
Palestine,
aborder en fait un thème qui est assez
to
peu connu
approach a theme that's
d'un
not
point de vue
very well
historiographique
known,
et qui est un épisode finalement
historically
assez
speaking,
fulgurant mais
and
tout à fait
which is
intéressant,
an interesting episode,
une campagne en fait qui a
which
été
is a
menée par la
campaign
LICA
that was
dans les
led
années
by
30 qui s'appelle
Lika in
la
the
campagne de
30s that was
rapprochement
called the
judéo-musulman.
campaign of
Et c'est un sujet qui, je
pro-
crois, enrichit vraiment la connaissance
closely
des
close
relations judéo-musulmanes, et ceci
of
à plusieurs
Jewish
niveaux,
and Muslims.
à travers
And
le
this is
regard
at
porté
several
par une
levels
organisation
through the
française sur les
look
rapports
that a
entre les
French
juifs et les
organization
musulmans
saw
dans les
between
pays
the
arabes,
rapport between Jews
la
and
nature
Muslims
aussi
in Arabic
effective de ces
countries,
rapports,
the
les perceptions
effective
multiples
nature of
de
this
coopération,
rapport, the
les
cooperation
rapprochements,
modes,
les frictions,
and the
à travers
frictions,
la connaissance des sources
the
et des
knowledge
dynamiques
of
de
the sources and the
l'antisémitisme dans
dynamics
ces
of
régions.
anti-Semitism
Et
in these
puis,
regions. And
je crois que le
also,
sujet permet
I
aussi une
think that the
réflexion
topic
sur le
also
mouvement
enables us
social
to
et le
reflect on the
militantisme.
social and
Sa portée, ses
movement
limites,
and
ses utopies,
militantism.
mais aussi son
It's
pragmatisme, un peu
utopia, it's
indispensable
pragmatism,
à la vie de la cité,
indispensable
qui ne semble pas
pragmatism,
complètement dénué d'intérêt à une
which
époque
are very
telle que nous vivons.
interesting in
Alors, je
the
vous prie
period we're currently
d'avance de m'excuser
living.
pour
So
ce
I'll
qui,
ask you
en
to
une demi-heure,
please
d'ici une demi-heure, va être un survol. Je vais essayer de ne pas trop dépasser
forgive me
pour qu'on puisse avoir quelques
because
documents
I'm going to
rapidement. Et puis,
try
j'aurai
to
un petit
have
document
an
de notes à vous
overview in
transmettre à
30
la fin,
minutes.
que je
I'll
remettrai
also
à la
have a
fin,
few
et
documents to
commenter,
show you at
plutôt que
the
de les
end, and I
mettre
will comment them at
de
the
manière un peu
end
chronologique
rather
au cours de la
than
présentation.
just
Et
show them as
j'ai
I
dit
go.
aussi que, évidemment,
And
je parlerai ici de la
also,
Liga
I'm
historique,
talking
mais ça ne
about
m'empêchera pas, si vous le souhaitez,
historical LICRA, which will not prevent us from having a
française.
discussion later on actions,
Alors,
positioning, and the positioning of the association.
d'origine,
I'd like to
LICRA.
come back to the origin of LICRA.
Rappeler qu'elle est née en
Remind
1927.
that it was born
D'abord
in
sous le nom de
1927.
Ligue
First, it
internationale
was
contre le
called
pogrom.
International League
Dans le
Against
sillage
Pogroms.
d'un procès
In the
médiatique très
sillage of a
retentissant qui fut celui
mediatic
de Samuel Schwarzbach.
trial
Je suis
that was
désolé, mais je
that
vais pas
of
rentrer dans le détail de
Samuel
ce procès, c'est
Schwarzbach, and
un
I'm
morceau
sorry,
dont
I'm not going to
ce
go into
soir,
the
c'est un
detail of
procès
these trials, but it was a
d'un
trial
assassin, d'un pogromiste qui
of
s'appelait
the
ukrainien, qui s'était réfugié à Paris
murderer of a
et qui
pogromist,
devient en fait
a
le procès
Ukrainian
non pas du
pogromist who
procès du
had
meurtrier juif qui veut venger
sought refuge in
ses frères
Paris.
martyrisés, mais
And
celui
so
du
it's
pogromiste
not
lui-même,
the Jewish,
sachant que Schwarzbach
it's not the trial of
ça se
the
passe en
Jewish
octobre
murderer
1927,
who
et c'est à la
was,
suite de cet événement que
but about
le
Schwarzbach
tribunal
who was
international contre le
acquitted.
pogrom
And that
va être
happened in October
créé par
1927. And it's after
des
this event that the
militants
International
plutôt
League
de
Against
gauche,
Pogrom was
d'anciens
created
dreyfusards,
by
et notamment autour d'un
left-wing
personnage qui est plus jeune, qui n'est pas, enfin,
militants,
qui est post-Dreyfusard, mais qui est né en
former
1981, qui s'appelle Bernard
Dreyfus
Lecage, un
supporters,
journaliste qui est né à Paris, mais qui est
and
d'ascendance
someone who was
ukrainienne
born in
et qui va être le
1895, whose
président
name is
par la suite de
Bernard
LICRA
Lacache, a journalist
jusqu'en
born in Paris,
1968.
but who was
Donc,
originally
à ce
from
début
Ukraine,
d'organisation
and who will be the
de lutte contre
president
les
of
pogroms
the
en Europe
LICA
centrale
until
orientale,
1968. So at the
contre
beginning,
l'immigration creuse,
the
contre toute politique
organization was
discriminatoire.
fighting
Elle
pogroms.
informe, elle alerte, elle proteste. Et puis,
It informs,
depuis
alerts,
1929,
protests, and
la Ligue
in the beginning of
internationale contre le pogrom devient
1929,
la LICA.
the International League
Et son
Against
combat
Pogrom
cette fois
becomes
se pourrait
LICA,
devenir
and its
plus global
fight this
sur
time
la
is more
défense
globally
des
about
Juifs
the
menacés
defense
à travers
of
le monde
Jews threatened
et
throughout the
je dirais de
world.
plus en plus en fait, à
And
cette
more and
période en
more
France, puisqu'on est
at
à la
that
fin des
time
années
in France,
1920,
since
c'est dans un
it's the
contexte
end of
de
the
crise
1920s and it's a
naissante à la
context
fin de la
of
Grande Dépression.
beginning of the
Il y a des
crisis
associations
following the
dites
Great
d'extrême droite
Depression. There are
qui se forment, et qui sont
extreme
xénophobes,
right-wing
qui peut
associations that
affirmer,
are
et cela est
being
très connu, donc un discours
um,
contre
that are born
les
and
immigrés
that are
juifs d'Europe
xenophobist
centrale
and
et orientale,
anti-Semitic
et puis un discours
against
contre
the
les juifs
Jewish
d'une manière
immigrants
générale,
of
avec des attaques
Eastern
plus
Europe,
abstraites qui nous sont assez
more
familières.
generally, with more
Domination juive de la
abstract
France,
attacks,
le
the
contrôle par les Juifs
domination,
de
the
ses
Jewish
richesses, de sa
domination of
politique, de ses médias,
France,
etc.
control of the Jews,
Parmi
of
les
its
discours,
wealth, its politics,
bien
its
sûr,
media,
discriminent
etc.
cette thématique du
Amongst this
complot
speech,
judéo-maçonnique
there is
propagée par
the
certaines
theme
idéologies
of
catholiques et nationalistes. La
Judeo-Masonic
thématique aussi du
theme,
bolchevisme, c'est
and
souvent elle qui
also
évidemment porte ces
Judeo-Bolshevism.
accusations.
And they're
Et
also
puis,
always the
très
same
important
people
également, le rôle
who
du
throw
mot
these
racisme,
accusations, and the
la
role
doctrine
of
de
the
Charles
word
Maurras,
of
du milieu
racism,
d'action française,
the doctrine of
qui
Charles
ont tant
Maurras,
influencé
who
la droite
influenced so
en France.
much the right
Moi,
wing in
les Juifs sont
France.
par essence l'anti-France,
Jews are
et les
per
fantasmes
se
auxquels
the
ils donnent lieu
anti-France,
à
and
l'extrême
the
droite
fantasies
nourrissent
that
un
they
discours anti-parlementaire
bear
favorable à un
to the
modèle
extreme
politique
right
autoritaire. Alors justement, en
gives a
1933, Hitler
political,
est
an
succédé
authoritarian political
de nouveaux
model. And in
groupements formés,
1933,
Action pour un
Hitler
modèle
is named
d'Italie
chancellor,
fasciste,
and new
ou
groups
l'Allemagne
are going
nazie,
to
et
be
qui
born
s'expriment sous la
for
forme d'Action
whose
contre
model is the
l'Algérie, et puis
fascist
énormément de
Italy or
propagande
Nazi
sous la forme
Germany,
de publications, de tracts,
and
de
they
réunions
arrive
publiques,
in the form of
etc.
publications,
Face à la menace fasciste,
flyers,
la
public
LICA
meetings,
mobilise ses militants
etc.
à Paris et en
So
province,
LICA is going to
de façon
mobilize
de
its
section,
militants in Paris or in
avec des
province with
publications comme Le
sections.
droit de vivre en
So there are
1932, des
publications, Le
réunions, des
Droit de Vivre in
manifestations, des
1933.
actions,
There are meetings,
parfois des opérations
demonstrations,
assez
actions,
originales
sometimes
comme
quite original
la traduction intégrale
operations,
de
such
Mein
as
Kampf.
complete
Ça a une tentative
translation
sous
of
la forme
Mein
la
Kampf,
forme d'une
since
version
Mein Kampf
expurgée en fonction des points de vue de l'expurgé des
existed
passages qui
in
pouvaient
an
gêner la sensibilité
expurgated
nationale. Et
version.
Hitler contrôlait vraiment
And
ce
so Hitler
poste-là. Et
really
donc la LICA
controlled this
a
aspect, and
largement contribué à
LICA
la diffusion d'une version
contributed to
intégrale de Mein
the
Kampf, ou la
to
revendication, par exemple, d'une
editing
loi
a
contre le
full
racisme
version
et
of Mein
l'antisémitisme
Kampf
qui sera obtenue à
and
force de
claiming
pression
a
médiatique
law
à la fin des années
against
30, quand ça a
racism and
été pris dans la marche aux lois,
anti-Semitism that will
ce
be
qui préfigure par la suite la
that will
loi dite
pass
loi Pleven de
after
70.
all these.
Et puis politiquement, l'événement
And
le plus important, c'est
politically,
celui
the
qui va
most important event
particulièrement nous
is the
intéresser
one that is
aujourd'hui,
going
c'est
to
le
interest us
soutien
today, is the
entier au Front
support,
populaire en France.
full
Alors comment
support
vient
to the Front
s'insérer le
Populaire
monde
in
arabe
France.
dans
So
cet
how
ensemble?
is the
Eh bien,
Arab
il faut
world
attendre l'émeute
play into that. We have to wait for the anti-Jewish riot of August 1933 in Constantine in Algeria so that the LICRA will develop its North African action. The context is that of colonial Algeria, where coexist different population, Muslim population, which is the majority and which doesn't have any rights, a European population, and a Jewish minority, which was granted French citizenship, and Muslim indigenous population who are not very academic, who are not very politicized. And so this ideological speech that plays on rancor and that really provokes rancor. The anti-Semitism in Algeria phenomena is old with different sources, French settlers, but also Europeans and mostly Spaniards, depending on the geography. There were a lot in Oran, for instance. And we think about of someone like Henri Coston, who was fierce anti-Semite in the 30s, and who will be also working in the occupation, but also the propaganda of Nazi Germany, of fascist Italy, with colonial speeches, who are trying to destabilize France, and of course anti-Semitism of the Muslim middles. So all of this being fueled by rumors, that of a Jew who would have supposedly urinated on the inside wall of a mosque, and that's wrong, of someone whose name was Dr. Mohammed Ben Jelloul, who was Constantine's notable and a figure of the new nationalist movement. The unrest starts August 13th and culminates in August 15th with the attack of Jewish houses. 23 Jews, men, women, children die. So I don't know about the local responsibilities, the attitude of the deputy mayor, Eric Morino, who really wasn't up to par. And this is the beginning of the action of LICRA in North Africa and the emergence of the Judeo-Muslim closening. So at the time, the title was "Blood Was Shed in France," with a editorial that we're accusing Bernard Lucas, who denounces a pogrom. And when we see how late this attitude came, we can wonder whether it was a pogrom. You know, all of this around terminology, specifically on October 7. And we do not want the responsibility of the massacre to go only to Muslim peasants, and LICRA will point their finger of the Croix-de-Feu to Colonel de la Roque. And all this will lead to consider that, on the one hand, we have to reinforce the fight against anti-Semitism, and then that they have to improve the condition, and at the same time, improve the condition of existence of the indigenous people, to stop frustration and to support social and political claims in their favor. At that time, the acronym LICRA appears in speeches. We're talking about International League Against Racism and Anti-Semitism, and we'll have to wait until 1979 for an official change, but there is a consciousness that we have to fight against all forms of racism. We said, at the time, they said fight against all forms of anti-Semitism, as if it has a matricial dimension towards racism. So, action against racism, defense of minorities, and it's fascism that will be specifically denounced. Specifically, it's subterranean action in Arab territories, and LICRA is a driver in the anti-fascist action in France, and that starts as soon as 1935, and that then will go towards coordination of the Rassemblement Populaire, popular meeting, leading to the victory of the left wing in spring 1936. So what is Judeo-Muslim collaboration? So local section of creation of LICRA in the political support given to Muslim indigenous people, and fraternization that's going to become more concrete, specifically during the 2 tours of President Bernard Lecache. First point, from 1934, LICRA develops local sections in North Africa, in Algeria, in French departments, but also in the 2 protectorates that are Tunisia and Morocco. Above the blocking tours that can put into place section of LICRA can be supported in the context at the time on parties and unions and associations that are part of the Front Populaire. They can also count on the engagement of a certain number of deputies who are very active. There is in this political sociability a clear element of a militant activity that leads to the installation of about 10 sections in Maghreb, within which circulates anti-fascist slogans, ideals of the Front Populaire, with an emphasis put on the influence of LICRA on anti-racism. And we know that at the beginning, there's a start of institutionalization. A few examples of the sections and composition in Algeria: the section of Tizi Ouzou, 61 members in 1938, mostly for administrative employees, 53%, and that's from the list that are in the archives, the LICRA's archives. It's a history that I won't approach today, but they can be seen in the memorial of Shoah since the start of the 2000s. Section I in Timushen, 23 members in 1936 for 61% of merchants, artisans. Section Relizan, 41 members in 1939, teachers, 69% in Morocco. Section of Meknes, 15 members in 1938 for teachers at 50%. Section of Mazagan, November 29, 1938, artisan, employees, administrative employees, merchants. In Tunisia, section of Tunis, 20 in January 1936, and then in 1937 we are at 97 for 89%. I mean 89% of the people coming from small businesses. And we estimate that in January 1937, there are 4,000 members within all the Maghreb space, and LICRA at that time boasts between 10 and 15,000 members. And all this fluctuates from one year to the other. But we still have a few leads or a few sources to measure the effective presence of Muslims in these sections. One example, but there are several. In Tizi Ouzou, 23 militants out of 61 are Muslims, so more than a third. And if you go further, out of these 23 Muslim militants, we have 4 policemen, a municipal councillor, a judicial ukil, which is a Muslim lawyer, a judge, a teacher, an industrial, a shopkeeper, etc. So it's not velas, it's there. And some sections are chaired by Muslims, which is the case in Ain Beda, Pérego, Sidi Bel Abbès, Mazagon, or Nabal in Tunisia. 2 examples of action, concrete actions: the support to the project Bloom Violets. So at that time, LICRA is going to defend strongly a project carried by Maurice Violet, who's state minister within the Bloom government, who aims at giving citizenship to a few thousands of Muslim indigenous, 1,000, which is very little, before giving it to more people. The campaign for this project starts in January 37, and the support is constant in the meeting on the LICRA Mikil in Algeria, and the project is quickly going to be faced to the opposition of the right wing and will be completely rejected by the Senate at the end of 1938. Another example, support to LICRA to claims of the Muslim Congress. In June 1937, LICRA adopts a representative chart of this organization, the Muslim Congress, which is an organization attached to France. It's not like Algerian nationalism, the beginning of Algerian nationalism. It is a militant team that is asking for social and political reforms, such as suppressing indigenous code and special financial delegation between the Algerian territory and France that ask for mandatory instruction, development of assistance or salary equality. In Algeria, LICRA demonstrations starts again with the same discourse and the same claims. As I say, on the two tours of Bernard Lecache in North Africa, the first one is from January to March 36, the second from February to May 1937. So there are tens of public meetings and conferences throughout all the Maghreb space, and during which the lead president of LICRA are going to gather crowds which are very diverse. For example, according to the police, 2,000 people in Constantine on March 7, 1937, amongst which 700 indigenous people, so 35% of the people, 55 people on May 21st, 1937 in Miliana, in the southeast of Algiers, 15 indigenous. Algiers, May 22, 1937, 800 people, amongst whom 450 indigenous. So we are at 56% of the public. So when we are in these meetings, there are speech favoring the Judeo-Arab fraternity in favor of a united front against racism and anti-Semitism, as I said, for social and political reforms. Bernard Lecache receives the support of associations and Muslim authorities. Under Carras, for instance, in Algeria, on February 25, 1937, 800 Muslims are present. March 11 in Constantine, Lecache is received at La Médersa, which is the Quranic school founded by Mr. Sheikh Ben Badis. The next day, the allocution in Arabic of Ben Badis is published in French in the columns of the Dépêche de Constantine. We can read the following words, I quote, "A good and true Muslim cannot be anti-Jewish because the Islam doctrine imposes all its fidel the respect of the other, no matter which race they belong to." End of the quote. So the ulema, so the doctors in faith, the elected, the members of Muslim Congress are present at the steps of this tour. So the order point is July 14, 1937 in Paris, where hundreds of Muslims demonstrate in the LICRA riot. That's for the Maghreb part. What's interesting is to see that this reproach, the fact of having the Jewish and Muslim get closer, was applied to Palestine in another context that's more difficult between Jews and Muslims and Arabs. So LICRA is an organization since from the beginning displays its neutrality on the question of Zionism. In 1929, Bernard Lecache went to Palestine after the Jewish massacres And from his visit, he wrote a book called Des Porteurs de Croix that was published in 1930 and containing absolutely terrifying descriptions of massacres against Jewish settlers at that time. And I reread the book after October 7, and it's really stunning to see the parallel of this kind of blind and destructive violence that really showed up in Palestine in 1929. And there's a strong parallel with what happened in October 27, 1923. In LICRA, opinions are extremely various, and they express themselves in various ways. There are Zionists, there are anti-Zionists, which are named as such. We have Zionists, we have anti-Zionists, but in any case, we have a very vigilant attention to the event happening in Palestine, specifically starting at the Arab Revolt of 1936. As I said, it's very close to what's happening in North Africa. It condemns all agitators, nationalists, local feudalities, and Hitlerian intrigues, with a lot of information on these intriguers coming from the Reich, and whose activity is to destabilize a locally Arab population. We even have some excerpts of Mein Kampf published in Arabic in the LICRA archives. So we encourage the settlers to emancipate as quickly as possible the Arab workers that are being exploited. So the leaders of LICRA, at the image of the socialist deputy Jean-Pierre Bloch, who joined the Central Committee of LICRA in 1935 and who will be the future president after the death of Lecage in 1968, future president of LICRA at the beginning of the 90s. And I quote Jean-Pierre Bloch in 1936, "In Palestine as elsewhere, there should be a necessary discrimination between capitalism, the Jewish capitalism, and working. The proletariat should accomplish its mission to both benefit the Arab and Jewish mass." End of the quote. LICRA considers there are Jews who are adversaries, but that's always been the same since the beginning, specifically with its critiques against Israelites, the good French Jews who are selfishly looking at their own interests and are closing their doors to immigrants and Central Europe Jews, etc. So we have these same critics. Other example of a statement of Jean-Pierre Bloch in July 36. So Jean-Pierre Bloch is not the only one to say so, but it's interesting, and I'm quoting him. Jewish colonization must bring to Palestine peace and liberty to Jews who were persecuted, and also justice, fraternity, emancipation to the poor Arabic proletariat. Zionist experience will only be able to thrive at this price. It can only get our socialist support at this price. And more concretely, on Jewish national Foy and immigration, LICRA is very discreet, and it's an exchange between Bernard Lecage and the Au Grand Matin journalist in January 26. Don't you think, Mr. Lecage, that the establishment of the Jews in Palestine would be the solution of the Jewish question? And he answers, it's possible, and I admire the courageous Alutzim, the pioneers, but LICRA, who has Zionists, non-Zionists, Jews, non-Jews, is neutral on this matter, and that will always remain this position. But I'll come back to it. Concretely, LICRA is not implanted in Palestine, mandatory Palestine, but it has some representative of organizations who are present in this demonstration. There are also a lot of organizations. We can quote Keren KMSL, with the pantheon of the left. LICRA also considers Antifa. Antifa is a Palestinian or socialist organization who defends workers against fascism, and it considers it to be its Palestinian faction. And the Central Committee of LICRA said we can get this organization, we can let them Jews and Arabs to get closer, and it would be a mistake to intervene because we would have against us Arabs, Zionists, and the British. And the Article 2 of Statute Antifa defends Jewish immigration. In September 36, LICRA organizes a conference in Paris, that of mutuality, a conference of organizations against racism and anti-Semitism, and is trying to gather everything existing in terms of fight against racism and anti-Semitism throughout the world. It's quite a big project, and Palestine is going to be one of the topic approached during this conference in September. And in a speech, Bernard Lecache reaches out to Messali Haj. Messali Haj is the leader of the North African, Lithuanian North African, so the nationalist, Algerian nationalist movement, which will become, after dissolution by the government the following year, the Popular Algerian Party. Messali Haj fight is that of independence, alliance with the Popular Front and LICRA. And so Bernard reaches out to him, is he united, will impose to the odious exploitation of the plebes, of the lack of education, political and social and political, to hatred of races. So why am I talking about Algeria again? Because the response that receives LICRA, the answer of North African Étoile, is exposed as such, and I quote, "We won't hide you our disappointment during the conference on mutuality because unfortunately we saw that amongst the Jews there are blind people who cannot see reality and who are following the path which is contrary to indispensable agreement between Arabs and Jews, because we want to reassert that we can never accept as a basis the Jewish foyer of Palestine, because Zionism is just a form of racism and imperialism, such as Hitler's or Mussolini's." End of the quote. So we are in 36, we're not in 1975 at UN, or 2001 at Durban, or Paris in 2025. The following years, we see the failure of these agreement, Judeo-Arabic agreement, and it's an organization even bigger that was founded by LICRA to encompass all anti-racist associations in the world. We can hear attacks against Arab fascism, provoking the return, for instance, of the intervention of a militant against oppression and colonial imperialism. You cannot call fascism the fight of a people for liberty. In July 1938, during a congress of Global Rassemblement Mondial Against Racism, there's an appeal to reinforce renouncing violence and union against the common enemy, fascism, that's launched. So condemnation of Hitler, of Mussolini, of terrorism, of imperialism, and praise of Muslims and Jews of North Africa, who showed and I quote, "Be united, make peace, and you will triumph." We don't know too much triumph against what, but this is a very internationalist mode that reminds the anchor of the LICRA, the left in LICRA. Anti-racist of all countries unite, and of course that is a reminder of Marx However, on this project, because it was on the diffusion of a former petition that was supposed to circulate in Africa, in North Africa, they enabled to gather signatures of petitioners of 3 religions, and it should have a strong symbolic value. And the petition was for the conference and destined to Foreign Office to support the principle of the conference, and was aiming at, I quote, penetrate well the Arab and Jewish population of the necessity of a solution to the Palestinian problem. It's interesting because since it was meant for North Africa, we can see that the question is very accurate in this region and not only in Palestine. In North Africa, at the end of the 1930s, there is quite a high tension level. And for my thesis, I had consulted all of this for people who had returned to Algeria and who were, it was the center of overseas archives, but I don't know what it is to do, and it's in Aix-en-Provence, and these are full of police reports on a bunch of topics that show the accuracy of anti-Semitism. So this petition is sent to all the Algerian sections so that the militants, here is the reaction of one of the Algiers section militant who write to the headquarters on January 26, 1939. We had decided to avoid carefully to put a little finger in the Palestinian problem and to not broach the Zionist question. We should not hide that here. In this matter, it is the renewed history of non-intervention, and that refers to the Spanish War. Everybody tells LICRA we should not intervene, but in other Jewish or militant Arab militant, people will be interested in a question that's not only ideological. And so it is not good to touch this question so explosive and to provoke the flagration of all its susceptibilities. The petition would only be harmful to the section that we have had such a hard time to broach. So, to conclude, to approach the success, limits, and failure of this campaign of agreement, Judeo-Muslim agreement. It's very mitigated, but it's a very nice page. So if we're really interested in the mobilization, anti-fascist mobilization, it's a page that's very interesting and very original. There are many symbolic demonstrations, testimonies of fraternity, very strong statements, very beautiful editorial, especially when Lukács does his tours. I could have spent hours on these statements who had immediate positive effect between February and May 37 is the second tour for Lukács. Over 60,000 persons attend these meetings. So 60,000 is a lot, but of course, it's not quite that much because we have to consider the factors limiting the impact of this episode. It's an episode linked to the existence of the Front Populaire, where in Metropolis, as well as Algeria, the experience of the left in power and its unity fizzles in a few years. And before the war, the anti-fascist front has a lot of failures. There is a pacifism that undermines and divides the left. The LICRA that defends firmness faced to Germany is all alone at the end of this decade. Second point, there is the weight of the structure, the colonial setting, inequalities, racism, conditions of existence that makes those beautiful speeches do not have a lot of weight to realities. Anti-Semitism is a very strong current fueled by some people who are sometimes commanding these policies. quote the one of the mayor of Constantine, Émile Morino, who was mayor in 1934 during the riots, and who was at the time one of the musketeers, as they called them, that had who had been a candidate to the election of 1898 in Algeria. And also, we could also talk about Abbé Gabriel Lambert in Oran. Third, I will give a special mention to the anti-Zionist propaganda in all of Maghreb and North Africa is worked by Arabic propaganda, and it is an evidence that a lot of Jews are in fact acquired to Zionism, and there's often a friction. It is easy to have a binary reading. There's a very strong tension in some of the community middles. And finally, and we could go even further in the detail of analysis, we also have to put back the LICRA weight in its context. It's not negligible, of course. LICRA boasts 50,000 members at the end of the 30s. And a good time today it makes one dream, but despite all of that, it's quite isolated. And if it can adopt a few anti-racist maxims, it remains a modest association perceived as Jewish, what they refuse to be. So really, we are welcoming free people. We're not people from communities were not Zionist, but at the time, LICRA at the time is perceived as being Jewish. So there's a reality linked to militant sociology, but it's an obstacle, and it's also an association with its weaknesses, its dead weights, etc. What will follow will see all that disappear. LICRA will not go back to North Africa. And in the afterward context between the birth of Israel, Algerian nationalism, and Pan-Arabism, and all the wars following, the Judeo-Muslim agreement will not really have a reality anymore. I'm going to stop here. I don't know if there's enough time, but I'd like to show you a few documents. I will share my screen. I don't know if you can see it. So far, we can't see anything. So I'm going to have to click on share. OK. And here it is. Now, if you could put it in diaporama, in slide show mode, that would be better. So these are the few documents to try and show this exposé, but I prefer to do it at the end to give you more elements. This is the droit de vivre that was published in August 1934 during a vacation after the Constantine pogrom. Jewish blood was shed in France. Besides, we see a few questions to the Minister of the Interior. Is it true that the garnison was consigned during pogrom? Is it true that these are really very interesting sources with some mistakes, of course, because they are reactions that are. I'm sorry about the quality of the document. Sometimes it's a little blurry. Just to give you an example of some activists or Jewish extremists, the Battle of Constantine, that's after the riots of August 34. This is what showed an anti-Jewish paper to illustrate the fact that LICRA becomes LICRA. So we have all races, quote unquote. But it's indeed, it's a time when racial thought is a reality with the soft acception of the term race. Example, I think it was in 1937, Bernard Lecache, Rassemblement populaire of Batna. So this is in the dynamic
démocratie et racisme.
Democracy and racism. I don't speak Arabic, but it's not very clear, so
Conférence publique et contradictoire, cette fois, c'est à
public
Philippeville.
conference and contradictory and public conference.
Lecage toujours.
Philippeville.
J'en ai pas parlé,
Bernard
mais
Lecage,
évidemment,
still.
comment dire, les manifestations, enfin les conférences de Lecage
Demonstrations, conferences of Lecage are not all greeted, all by critics. You have anti-Jewish movements. Bernard Lecage, it's completely fake, but it's the techniques of the extreme right to change names, put a K instead of a C. It's part of a strategy, and that's not from yesterday. And sometimes we also say Zionist. Lecage will not speak in Constantine, he spoke. So that's Lecage received by the Bashaga. Bashaga is a dignitary of administrative hierarchy, and this is in Ain Temushem in Algeria in 1937. On the left, on the right of the Bashaga, you have Sadi Aleli, who was the president of the section of Oran. So these are pictures on the newspaper Le Droit de Vivre, and I don't know if you can see, it's a difference, a conference, Bernard Lecage. You can see people wearing burnouses in the crowd. There are some words in Arabic. We have a full room. We wish we had some room as full sometimes. So there's an emulation. We can say that there's an emulation. And this is April 37, and it's in Oujda, in Morocco. I love this one. It's the Cornic School, Médersa of Mascara. It's April 1st, 1937, Bernard Lecage. Can you see my cursor here? So Bernard Lecage is in the middle, his wife, André. Sorry, I cannot name the others. I'd have to go back to the source, but it's what's moving is to see those raised wrists referring to the Front Populaire. Palestine, I did not have that many as examples, so we were right as soon as 1939. So that's the Lecage's trip to Palestine, and there are things that are very stunning in the analysis of what may happen, and this position, which is very complex. Union first, and we'll talk about sharing later. These are nice texts for peace. Anti-Semitism in the 30s. This is at the Rouizan Mosque, the Rouizan's Mosque. So these swastikas are not necessarily done by indigenous people, often by extreme right militants. Long live the Jews on the cemetery. There's a graffiti on a Saint-Denis wall. Pharmacie Astra in Oran, so that's from June 1940. Anti-Zionist flyers. Send Jews to Palestine, the cost of one-way ticket, which is also a classic and often published, but on the continent, but also in Maghreb. A few artisanal flyers that I'll let you read. Death to Jews, long live the Arabs. We don't know who do that. We don't know. What we know is that when there's a police report on incidents where you have Jews and Arabs who are fighting, and anti-Semist tracts and flyers. I don't know how to decrypt them. I don't know if some of you read Arabic, but this is an anti-Jewish flyer, and that's presented by the police. Maybe they are flyers made by activists who do it in Arabic to have some anti-Jewish. Hitler in his Palestine, Arabs and Jews, punish the pogromists and make peace. So this is for Union, Judeo-Arabic Union, for agreement, Judeo-Muslim agreement. That's after the war. And as I said, it's not really actual, current. Anti-racists of all countries unite. That's a very beautiful message. And that's the Congress of the World Gathering Against Racism of July 1938. Thank you. Thank you for this very interesting presentation. Does someone have questions? I'm sorry, I know there isn't very much time left. If there's one little question, that would be good. I always have a question. Does someone want to speak? I'm looking at the chat. So, if nobody isn't going to, if no one is going to say anything, at some point you talked about a fight that would be anti-capitalist, and I'd like to know whether LICRA, despite its neutrality, you described very well this way of wanting to not express themselves too much on some delicate political points. Did you find in archives or maybe in the DDV this idea, this anti-capitalist idea? Yes. It's interesting because when you look at the anti-racist movement today, which is extremely fragmented, there's a very anti-capitalist trend. This movement is plural, but there's a whole part very much engaged against liberalism, etc., and that's fundamentally anti-capitalistic. These are the origin of LICRA, the LICRA. Lukács is someone who comes from, who was very close to the Bolshevik Revolution. He was in France, but he wrote in newspapers, specifically about Maurice Souvarine, who had been excluded from the Communist Party and who was then excluded of the Communist Party in the beginning of the 20s because he was accused of writing in the bourgeois press. But he did not it was still attached to the revolution idea. And in 1927, he chairs the Committee of Commemoration of the 1917 revolution. But LICRA is going to be more and more open to the action of the Front Populaire, to people who was very transpartisan, against the enemy, the capitalist right, using racism, anti-Semitism to divide the masses, and who weaponizes this. And then there's also this idea of inequality of wealth, dispatching of wealth, and you have some frustrations, and the workers, the plebe, which is a word I used before, is going to take that to indeed accuse people, the Jews, who, as everybody knows, possess all the wealth against power, etc. So LICRA is very much a left-wing organization, and they'll have to wait until after the war to be more centered and even go more towards the right. There was the war, a lot of the Central Committee and others who joined General de Gaulle in London, a certain number of militants, amongst whom Jean-Pierre Bloch and others like Lazare Rachlin, who were free French and who had very important missions in the resistance. And so it becomes more complicated after the war. And it's after the war that we're going to have the movement founded against racism, anti-Semitism, and for peace. Before this movement abandons the non-anti-Semitism and becomes the movement against racism for friendship between different people in 1977. So this LICRA is more of a left-wing organization.
Parce qu'en l'occurrence,
and
on le voit bien avec la montée
we can
du,
see,
c'est plus la montée, c'est
and then it's going to
la
change. And
présence
we can
très
see
forte du
with the very
Rassemblement
strong
national, on voit bien
presence
avec le
of the
sentiment
Rassemblement
d'abandon d'une
National. We can
partie
see with the
de
feeling of
la population,
abandon of a part of the
l'ouverture
population,
effectivement sur un vote un peu
and
de rancœur, etc.
people who are
Ceux
more
verrouillent, qui
towards
agissent
a
pour
vote of
permettre
rancor,
véritablement la question
etc. These are
de la
dynamics,
répartition finalement
and we
de
never
justice sociale,
really
etc.
ask
Pardon, je
a
suis très
question about
révolutionnaire, c'est pas
dispatching. I don't want to
ma
do a
culture d'habitude, mais je
revolutionary
pense on aurait tort de se détourner de cette, enfin, on
speech.
aurait
It's not
intérêt
my philosophy,
à
but
regarder un petit peu en arrière pour
we
mieux
should
appréhender
look backward to more better apprehend certain current problems. Yes,
Noah, we need to
Noah.
stop now, no? Can we have 5 minutes more or we need to stop? Oui, yeah. Alors, comme d'habitude, j'aime beaucoup.
As
parce qu'en
usual,
fait, c'est moi qui initie
I
les
like that
questions, mais
because
ça
I'm the
enclenche
one
d'autres
initiating the
questions, donc c'est
questions,
génial.
but it leads
Merci
to other
beaucoup,
questions.
Monsieur
Thank you
Farage,
very much, Monsieur
qui pose
Farage,
la question quelle
who's
présence des
asking
femmes à
this
la LICRA.
question. What is the presence, what is the female presence in LICRA? Is there a feminine touch in LICRA?
Oui.
Yes.
Oui, il y a une section
Yes,
féminine.
there is
Comme
a
on
feminine
faisait à l'époque,
section, a female section.
il y avait des sections de jeunes,
There
il y avait
were
des sections d'Africains, etc. Et puis il y avait les sections féminines
sections
locales.
for
Alors,
young, for the
on a
youth, African,
des
etc. And there were also
figures,
female sections. So we have a
des
few
femmes vraiment très
figures,
engagées,
some very
qui sont
committed women, very
qui écrivent des
engaged
textes, qui
women
sont,
who write texts.
le problème de,
The
on a quand même,
problem,
enfin, la LICA n'échappe pas à son époque et on a des femmes qui souvent
at the
sont là
time, we
pour
have women
soutien,
who very often are here to
qui organisent des
support,
kermesses et
uh,
je peux dire font les gâteaux, mais
for
on est
support,
presque là.
and who organizes
Mais vous avez quand même
carnivals
c'est
and
évidemment
baked cakes,
très
etc.
mixte. Pour
But
ce qui est
it's
vraiment
very
je dirais,
mixed.
des postes au comité
And
central,
that's for the post in
très
the
masculin.
Central Committee. It remains very much male.
Sur la présence d'une section féminine.
But
C'est
we
démontré
emphasize the presence of a female section, and that's for organization, even at the Croix de Feu or the French Social Party of Colonel de la Roque. It's interesting because the valor could be more linked to women.
Ça pose une question quand même.
So
D'imaginaire, je veux dire.
it brings up a question. I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
La valeur paix, elle pourrait être dans un
The
imaginaire
peace
stéréotypé
valor
féminin,
is
en fait.
maybe in a stereotype
rapprochement,
imaginary
le
as
père,
feminine,
etc.
you
C'est
know,
intéressant,
friendship,
ce statut de
care,
potiche un peu,
etc. So that's interesting. Yes, it's true that it's a little bit macho, and we can see that in some administrative letters. It's not the most progressist.
C'est pas une vraie problématique en fait.
It's not, but it's not a real problematic. It's not feminism. And I would say that after the war, we have this figure of Josephine Baker, who is the delegate who represents International LICA between 1955 and 1957, where she's going to feminize LICA and make it more popular. But I think that it's a very specific case. Yes. It's a synecdoche, as usual. Other question from Anne Mariotti, and I think we'll be done, who says that you talk about Algeria a lot. Could you give a couple of pieces of information on Tunisia or Morocco regarding LICA and your expose, maybe? If something comes to mind, I want to say that Anne Mariotti, if she wants some element, I can send them to her, or I can send them some pages of my work regarding this particular region. It's not residual. Tunisia and Morocco are not residual, but at the time it's Algeria, because Algeria was part of France. Algeria was a French department, and there are dynamics that are a little different, even if the question of anti-Semitism goes through the whole space. And again, Madame Aflalou, I believe, had talked and said that she had the feeling of living in fear of anti-Semitism during her whole youth in Morocco. So we're in the topic, but regarding the political engagement, relations
Bloom, mais pas que Bloom,
that
parce que,
LICRA,
les expériences Bloom,
about
il y a
that,
aussi,
LICRA had a
pas mal
very
de balayer,
important
etc.,
role.
et autres. On a beaucoup de démarches auprès du ministre
So
des
there are a
colonies, notamment
lot
auprès
of
Georges Mandel, etc.,
formalities
pour
towards the Minister of
soutenir
Colonies, specifically Georges Mandel,
la
etc.,
législation
etc.,
contre le code de l'indigénat, comme je l'ai dit,
to
pour le
soften
musulman, etc.
legislation
C'est
against the
vraiment le
Code of
dialogue
Indigenous,
qui
as
intéresse
I said, for the Broom Violet
voilà. Donc, je
project.
dirais que là,
It
le
really
musulman,
is
c'est
the
important. Et en fait,
Algeria that is concerned here.
il y a des
And I
sections,
would
il y a
say
des
that
cahiers, il y a des
Tunisia and
articles,
Morocco is
bien sûr, qui
important. There are some very
voilà.
beautiful things. There are sections, there are
J'ai rien de
letters, there are
particulier, qui pourrait
archives, but I don't have anything specific
On s'en
tonight
fout.
regarding
Ok,
this.
parfait. Nous en
Okay,
avons
very
terminé.
well.
Merci
We are done.
infiniment
Thank you very much
pour ce fabuleux
for this
exposé. Merci aux
fabulous
participants. La
presentation.
vidéo sera
Thank
mise en
you to
ligne
the
pour ceux qui
participants. The
souhaiteront.
video
À
will
très
be
bientôt.
online. And
Merci.
see
Bonne
you soon.
soirée.
Thank you and have a good
Merci beaucoup.
evening.
Merci, Eric.
Thank you, everybody. Erika.